Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Year Was, a podcast all about today. I'm your host, Michael Montalvo, and together we take the history train back in time once again to discover what makes today truly unique. For the next few minutes, we continue to gather random nuggets of trivia to make you sound smart, or just drop that little fact that makes others stop and say,
Oh, shit. I'm sorry, Mike, I forgot.
it's fine. I have a script if you want to.
Yeah, I listen to your podcast all the time. And I say, okay.
I'm leaving this in.
Okay. Hey, who invited you?
Then
Like, seriously, why are you here?
that's pretty good. On this episode, we examine the events that occurred today, July 31st. So, today, we're going to talk about a topic that came up really last minute. This came up, I texted you about it,
Yeah.
and that was about 10 minutes after I found out about it. So, it was, like I said, just last minute for everything. I was originally going to go in and do an episode about Ted Bundy, because I found out my Romanoff episode about the execution was one of the most viewed ones. So I figured something, the more murdery, the better as far as...
Typically, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I think with everything going on with Ted Bundy this year, especially, Netflix did a movie, they did a whole documentary series. I don't know that I can add anything to that. And I don't want to just go out there and retell the same information that everyone's been telling.
Oh, you mean like everyone did on Chernobyl?
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Gotcha.
So I didn't want to do that. And I looked into it, and I found this out, and selfishly, wanting to get you back on the show, I went and picked the topic of the United States Coast Guard.
I can do that.
So
I can talk your ear off about the Coast Guard.
that'll be good. So the year was 1876, and on this day, the United States Coast Guard established an officers' training school in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
Right.
Now, the first things first. Back then, it wasn't called the Coast Guard. It was the Revenue Service.
Revenue Cutter Service.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it was in 1790 that Congress authorized Alexander Hamilton's proposal to build tin cutters, which I looked up, and are single-masted, fore and aft rigged sailing vessels with at least two handsails and a mast set further aft than that of the slope. Now, if that makes sense to you, you must be a sailor, because that just...
Right.
went-
well,
and
and they're still called cutters.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Real quick, I wrote that into the script, the whole hand thing above my head.
Right on.
And I wrote that I wrote it into the script. So that was a good little bit for
That
me.
is good. That's really good.
So over the years, the Revenue Service took on many responsibilities, including protecting ships from pirates and intercepting slavers after the Atlantic slave trade was banned.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1797, the British and French privateers had been harassing American vessels, and because of this, Congress authorized President John Adams to use the revenue cutters as a defense against hostilities near the coast to protect both the coast and incoming commerce.
And I think that was about the same time we were merged with the U.S. Life Saving Service. I believe that's when it became the Coast Guard, right? I can't remember the years, but when it became the Coast Guard, those two services were brought together, which is why we're still law enforcement, defense, and life saving.
I actually mentioned that here in a minute, and
Okay.
we'll go into dates a little bit and kind of go into some of that a little bit more. So the next year, Congress ordered the Revenue Service to cooperate with the Navy in times of war or when so directed. And this is actually still in practice today.
It is.
And they used it during World War II. So people that have listened to this, if you listen to our D-Day episodes, we talk a little bit about them being involved in the landing operations for the invasion of Normandy. So Secretary of Treasury Lewis McLean noted that morale was low because of the appointment and promotion of officers. It was more politics than anything else. And it might still be that way. I'm not really sure how much we've really come past that.
It's come way past that.
So it's more merit and...
Well, it is, and it's based on your education, what you want to do, what you can do, and now the U.S. Coast Guard has the highest number of college-educated and enlisted people.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people have degrees and college education. They stay enlisted.
Yeah.
But there's still there are tracks to become an officer, and it's not you don't see appointments and all like they did back then, because it was just part of your family tradition, and you've all been officers, and because your dad was, not so much.
Let's see. It was on July 31st of 1876 that Congress established the first school for training officers for the Coast Guard. And what I found out, though, was that it wasn't until May of 1877 that the first cadets arrived and began a 2-year training program. Part of that took place on a 94-foot schooner, the Dobbin, and that set a tradition that's still going on today, where every graduate of the U.S. Coast Guard spends time on a sailing vessel. I don't know, is that something that applied to you as well, or is that more just an officer thing?
No, in fact, that's, as far as I know, it's only the Coast Guard Academy.
Okay.
They had the Cutter Eagle, and there were, I think, 4 billets for the summer sail for people in my rate, which was port security, which it's now called maritime law enforcement, and I put in for it more than once, but you never got it, because that line is really long to go and service. And you're not actually on, if I remember correctly, you weren't on the Eagle. You were on one of her, the part of the flotilla they had.
Okay.
They had patrol boats and some other boats that went with her.
Let's see. Now, it says here that I have a quick question, and I actually wrote that in too.
All right.
And the question is, what are the differences between vessels, ships, and schooners, and then the cutters and all of that? And how do you tell them apart? Because they seem to, whenever I was looking it up, it seemed to differentiate between, they specifically name vessels and they specifically name ships.
Vessel is essentially any boat. From a kayak to a cruise liner is a vessel. And then you have motor vessels, sailing vessels, merchant vessels, I said motor vessel, right?
Yep.
Tankers, there's all kinds there, and it's always, motor vessel is M/V and then the name. So the MV Montalvo, and it's all capital letters. I don't know why. That's just a thing. So ship, I forgot the number. I think it's 100 feet, somewhere in there. The Coast Guard differentiates a cutter from a boat. So boats are little ones, but we don't call ours ships. They're cutters, all of them, because the Navy's vessels are ships because they're warships. They have boats too, but there's warships. Ours are not warships, even though they have guns and all the evil pokey things. They are still part of civilian law enforcement as well, so they're not a warship. And there's a lot of legalities that come into play. So that's why you'll hear everything, any of the big ones, called a cutter. So 270-foot cutter, high-endurance cutter, versus we sailed on the 87-foot cutters. And we say sailed even though none of them have sails anymore.
I was going to ask that, because it seemed a lot of kind of the pictures that I was looking up, and a lot of the stories seem to really show just like sails on the ships.
Well, you were talking about like sloops like my boat, and then schooner. I can't remember. I have to look at pictures to remember all this, but it does. It has to do with the number of sails and number of masts.
Okay.
And if it's a little mizzen mast, or if it's too large main mast, and how many head sails and all that differentiates in the kind of classical terms of schooner and cutter and so on and so forth. So that's the best way I can explain it.
Now, I don't know if, having never gone through the Coast Guard, if I can call you a coastie.
Yeah, that's the official.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does the modern coastie have to go through during officer training?
I can't remember all the officer tracks, but they have an officer candidate school. They did have Rocky. Now, reserve officer candidate initiation, something like that, and then the academy. The academy's 4 years. It's like any other military academy in which you're a college student in a very strict military school. The Rocky program was similar to what I went through. It's a very condensed, intense boot camp thing that they don't really teach you much about your job that you're going to do when you get to your station. It's about how to be in the Coast Guard.
Okay.
When I went in, they needed cops.
Mm-hmm.
This is post-September 11th, and they were really hurting. So they sent us to Cape May for however long it was, 2 or 3 weeks, and hammered us for 20 hours a day on how to be in the Coast Guard. Nothing about being a cop.
Mm-hmm.
That all came later when we got our certifications and everything. So essentially those are the tracks. There are other ways, other commissions that I'm not really super tight on. There are warrant officer and some other ways to go about it. But essentially that's college or an officer track of how to be in the Coast Guard, and then you go do your thing.
Okay. Well, I was looking it up too, and they were saying that they offer a couple of different college or different types of classes that you can take, mostly sciences and engineering, biology, and let me see if I can find it in my notes over here. Environmental science, and you can do chemistry, geophysics, and then you also do military training programs during the summer. And from what I could tell, and this is all from Wikipedia, so it's take it with a grain of salt as far as the knowledge that I got. Yeah. They have your SWAB summer, which is basically basic training that ends in a week-long voyage aboard the Eagle. Mm-hmm. And then they have third class summer, which is 5-week training on the Eagle under sail and 5 weeks aboard an operational cutter in the role of junior enlisted. Then they have second class summer, which is damage control training, your weapon qualifications, navigation, aviation, and all of that type of thing. And then your first class summer, which is 10 weeks aboard an operational cutter in the role of junior officer, or an operational internship, which is split with the internship itself and then a cutter. So you do 5 weeks on both.
Right. I knew somebody that did that. Yeah. Yeah.
And each week during the school year, I guess, you also participate in a regimental review and formal military drill. Mm-hmm. And then just your basic military duties. You go on watch and all of that type of thing.
Yeah, they're very strong in that tradition of the old school maritime stuff, and everybody gets basic seamanship, even if you never touch a boat your entire career. I mean, there are people that go an entire career and sit in an office. You know, they're very valuable yeomen and people like that may not ever go out. Mm-hmm. I mean, well, it depends on how you go in. If you just enlist, you're going to be on a cutter or on a boat somewhere. But there are people who don't touch boats, but you still know how to tie the knots, and you learn firefighting and life saving and that kind of stuff.
Okay. What I found out, and what was actually a little bit interesting for me with this, is that tuition is free to the academy, and you do receive a monthly pay. And after everything's done, you leave the academy with a Bachelor of Science degree. But you are commissioned as an ensign for 5 years of active duty. Yep. And then that increases if you go into more specialized trainings and everything.
And you will get a terrible, horrible junior officer job. Yeah. And then you're tortured with having to be the unit morale officer and stuff like that. We had, every time we would get a new ensign, they would make them be the morale officer. And if they did that job dutifully, praying that the next new guy would come in and have to do it. So yeah, that was a tradition.
So you talked a little bit about the dates a minute ago, and I have some dates here. And it was 1915 that the Revenue Service and the Life Saving Service were merged into the new agency that was the United States Coast Guard.
And then we took in, in the 20s or 30s, we took in the Lighthouse Service.
39,
which became Aids to Navigation later. Yeah.
And then in 46, they added in the Bureau of Marine Inspection and Navigation.
Yep.
And this was originally part of the Treasury Department. And then in 1967, they transferred it to the Department of Transportation. And then in 2003, they transferred it again to the Department of Homeland Security.
I was there for that. Yeah.
Now, I was going through these notes the other day, and I was reading through them, kind of trying to make sure it sounded all right, make sure the flow sounded okay. And so I called up my sister, and I was reading this to her, and I was like, "How does it sound?" And she asked me a question, and I didn't know really how to answer it. So, what is the difference between the Navy and the Coast Guard?
The Navy is a maritime military service. Mm-hmm. They kill people and they break things. That's what they do.
That's what they do.
It's aviation. It's Well, we don't have battleships anymore, but warships, missiles, submarines, things like that. The Coast Guard is it's essentially everything else. So I was stationed originally at what was called a Marine Safety Office that later became a sector office. So you could step outside of our office and you would see the Marine Environmental Response. They're the people that take care of spills and things like that. You would see the desk where they handle incoming and outgoing ships. So it's sort of like an air traffic controller, not quite a pilot office, but they knew what was coming in, and so they would know how we would respond as far as it being a security threat. And you had us, and we were cops, and then you had intelligence. We had our own intelligence crew. You had down the street, you had aids to navigation, the guys that kept all the beacons and everything running. Then you had the station that fixed everything, and then you had a little further away, you had the station that went out and saved people, and then you had the air station. So it's all kinds of things, and it's military in the sense that we're there when we need to be and do military things. But my job was law enforcement. I mean, I was just a cop.
Well, and you've mentioned just being a cop or just cop for a while, and I wonder if you can just kind of, if you break it down to just its simplest forms, would it be fair to say Coast Guard is more of a police and the Navy is more defense?
Yeah, that's fair. We do things that the Navy can't do. In other words, if you're out, on your boat drunk in a shipping channel, the Navy can't deal with you because it's posse comitatus. They're military and they can't act upon civilians.
Okay.
So they send us out there because we're police. We're like. I remember in my unit we went through about 6 different patches on our vests. On our we didn't wear the what do they call them, load bearing vests like they do now. We had the vests that go over it. We had them that said Coast Guard. We had them that said USCG. We had them that said Federal Officer. They didn't know what to call us, for a long time. So we can enforce any military or maritime law that's subject to that jurisdiction, and on the shore things that touch it. So like refineries and things like that were sensitive, we could secure and protect those things and make sure they're handling their zones right and that sort of thing.
Okay.
The Navy can't come in and do that. So that's the difference. It's the closest analogy is if you drive 90 miles an hour in a 40 on an Army base, the Army can stop you because that's an Army thing. If you do it in a national park, the local police can't stop you, but the park police can. And if you do it in the middle of town, nobody but the town police can do it.
Okay.
So we're just kind of in that little zone. And there were times, you mentioned it was originally under Department of Transportation. Yep. And then when I was in, we changed over to Homeland Security. And we were funded by Homeland Security, and we got Homeland Security gear. And they switched us from the military M9 Beretta to the SIG DAK 40 caliber handgun. Well, they issued us hollow point ammunition, but you can't carry hollow point ammunition if you're on a DOD mission. And sometimes we would do because that's part of the it slipped my mind. Geneva Convention rules. You can't carry hollow points. So if we went out to inspect an incoming vessel because of military intelligence, and it's considered a potential military threat, and we can't go on board with hollow points. And we did that one time where we were on a mission for Homeland Security, and they said, "Hey guys, we got another vessel out here. We need you to go look at it." And we started looking over the paperwork, and we said, "Wait, that's DOD," and we're carrying hollow point. So we actually had to go all the way back to the station and change ammunition and go out. So you're kind of in the middle of all that stuff. And they caught some guys drunk and stupid with drugs and stuff on a beach one time, and we just happened to be the first ones there. Well, we don't have jurisdiction over those particular state laws, so we just had to stand there and look stupid until local cops got there, that kind of thing.
Now, with a name like Coast Guard, do they stay pretty close to the U.S. itself then, or
all over the world?
Just all over the world.
Yeah, some units, like we were never more than 20 or 30 nautical miles because the nature of what we did, which was protect the seaport and the ships coming and going. But there are units that go all over the world. There are units that will stay in inland waterways. Things it just totally depends on the mission.
Okay. I wanted to mention the motto of the Coast Guard.
Yep.
Which is Semper Paratus, which is always ready.
Yep.
And whenever I read that, the first thing that came to mind was the Boy Scout motto.
Yeah.
Which was be prepared.
Be prepared.
And I wonder if there's any connection really between the two, or if there's I don't know how to word this except to say, could the Coast Guard be considered the Boy Scouts of the military?
Kind of. The difference here's how I view that. The difference between the Coast Guard and the rest of the military. When I went to Reby, when I went to that school, we were learning how to be in the military, and they were issuing gear, and you had to polish your shoes and stand up straight and march and sing little stupid songs and all that stuff. And there were a couple of guys that had been in the Marine Corps, and they were moving to the Coast Guard because they lived near a Coast Guard unit, and they wanted to finish out their military time and get a retirement being a Coast Guard reservist instead of a Marine Corps. And they were asking about inspection. They were really concerned about inspection, and they said, should we just buy extra gear here for inspections? And our chief just said, what the F are you talking about? And he goes, well, unit inspections. And what they would do is they had uniforms that you would go to work in every day. But when there was an inspection, they had these perfect, pristine uniforms that are kept in like a hermetically sealed vessel that they would put on and pass inspection. He said, dude, you're in the Coast Guard. You don't have time for that. You're going to be working. So whatever you're doing in the Coast Guard, you're working. I mean, we trained, we did all that stuff. But you have to be prepared because there's always a mission around the corner. There's always something. And especially if you're rescue, if you're air crew, things like that. And so we were always at work. And if we weren't at work, if there was nothing going on that day, they would say, okay, you can go to the gym or just take a vehicle and go patrol this area or go talk to these people and stay tight and stay ready because it could happen at any moment. Something would happen. And so that's the difference. The motto is just about the preparedness and the attitude that the Coast Guard has.
Okay.
So I hope that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah. Well, I think that's going to be a good point to stop on for this episode. I think the actual start date of the Coast Guard's coming up in August, I think. And
yeah, it's the Coast Guard Day, August
4th, I
4th.
think.
Yeah.
And I want to go in and do something a little bit more in depth, I think.
Sure.
For that one.
Yeah.
So if I can get you back on for that,
I'd love to. Yeah, I love the Coast Guard and wish I could still be in it.
Yeah. But I think that's going to do it for us today. If you're watching this on YouTube, which we actually have video this time.
Cool.
You can find the audio version on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, Google Play, pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. You can find Matt on YouTube and I guess same places, your podcast apps. On
the Van Cave. Yeah, we just do Buzzsprout. So, and we just hit 100 subscribers, so you can go to YouTube, the Van Cave.
So go listen to that. I'm a guest on there every now and then.
Yep.
And it's always a lot of fun to come over here and do that.
Yeah, it's a blast. Love doing this stuff. And I was watching, listening to some podcasts at work, and we're just like the big guys, man. Yeah. We're just regular dudes with podcasts, and we're always on each other's. Each other's stuff.
If you like this podcast and you want to hear more, give us a rate and a review. That helps me out and lets me know what direction to keep this going in. And hey, if you like it, share it with a friend because they might like it too. You can find me on social media and at YouTube at the Apple Cider Club. Do you do social media at all, or
just kind of Facebook? Yeah, that's pretty much all I follow.
Okay. Well, and as always, I want to thank the Tim Kreitz Band for our musical theme and to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. And I gotta do the sound effect.
Right on.
Gotta do the little finger thing too.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you.